workshop, lunchtime workshop. We'll make a start, and hopefully there'll be more people coming in throughout the session. Yeah. So, good afternoon. My name is Yuki Yasui, and I'm the Asia Pacific Network Managing Director at GFANZ, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. And I also have my colleague, Monica Bay, Director of Investment Practices at AIGCC. So, the two of us will try and entertain you while you eat your lunch on net zero transition planning. So I'll just start with a quick introduction to what GFANZ is, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, for those who might not know us. So it's a global coalition of financial institutions that are committed to supporting the real economy's decarbonization by 2050. And we are an umbrella or an alliance of alliances of these net zero financial sector specific alliances such as the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance or the NZAM, the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative, and AIGCC is a secretariat to two of the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiatives in this chart. So the umbrella of these net zero alliances represent about 40% of the global financial assets around the world, with over 650 financial institutions. And in Asia, we have over 65 financial institutions. Now, one of the things that GFANZ is really, really pushing on is to make sure that finance supports the real economy decarbonization. All the net zero financial sector alliances are committed to financing or bringing their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions to net zero by 2050. But we really want to make sure that that translates into supporting that finance supports the real economy decarbonization, because portfolio decarbonization does not automatically or necessarily mean real economy impacts. So the reason GFANZ and all the financial institutions are committed to net zero is that we know that we are depleting our remaining carbon budget quite quickly. And we are set to exhaust all our remaining budget by the end of the decade. And if that happens, and if we do have like a 2.5 degree warming, that the economic loss is going to be quite tremendous as well, that we expect about 10 years of economic growth loss if we hit like a 2.5 degree warming. So there is the urgency to limit our temperature increase to 1.5, and that means that we need to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, which means that we need to ramp up our renewable energy capacity, meaning that finance needs to go to these things. Now, this has meant that a lot of effort around the world by governments and regulators have already started, where they have tried to provide guidance and supervisory supervision around what is financing for the transition and how transition plans will help you in getting there. So in Asia, we've got Japan that has come up with principles and guidances around the transition, and the ASEAN taxonomy has come up with their broad set of transition taxonomies that are not just about green, but also supporting the brown to green activities and companies as well. And Hong Kong and Singapore monetary authorities have set out guidances around transition planning for financial institutions as well. Now, as I was saying earlier, we need to get the finance to really support the real economy decarbonization. And I think it's already been touched upon this morning as well, that it's not just about financing the green. And in Asia particularly, we need to finance the transition from brown to green, which includes supporting those that are high emitting sectors, so not just divesting away from it, but actively embracing and supporting their transition, as well as dealing with the existing high emitting assets that are already in our economy that's not going to retire anytime soon. So we need to accelerate the managed phase out of high emitting assets like coal power plants that was mentioned in the earlier panel as well. Bunchai was saying, you know, the average age of coal power plants is about 13 years. It's a teenage years in Asia Pacific, and we have about 5,000 generators in Asia at that average age. So, so the good news is that we have already started to ramp up on our clean energy investments, and we are at an inflection point, first time ever in our history, where we are nearly par between fossil fuel investment and clean energy investment, which means that for every dollar of investment that goes to fossil fuel, 0.9 is going $0.9 is going to renewable energy last year, and this year it's the ratio is set to surpass that. So 1.5 to 1 is the ratio that we are going to be seeing, is what IEA is expecting for this year. But we still need to ramp this up further to meet our 2050 1.5 degree ambition. And the ratio that we need to aim at is 4 to 1 ratio. So for every dollar of fossil fuel investment, $4 need to go to renewable energy and clean energy investments. And for that, we really need an institutional-wide effort to really move our titanic institutions towards aligning the whole institution to be able to deliver at a portfolio level the alignment towards net zero. So we're not talking about just niche green bonds or niche sustainability linked loans. We are talking about your whole portfolio coming into one of those 4 buckets that you saw earlier. And to do that, it really is about institutional change management. So we at GFANZ have come up with a transition plan framework for financial institutions and for real economy companies as well. This one that you're seeing is for the financial institutions. And the reason we came up with the real economy transition plan framework is because as investors and financiers, you need to be able to read the real economy's transition plans as well, and to be able to assess them. So it's not just important to have your own transition plan, but it's really important to be able to read your investee company's transition plan and to assess which direction they are going. Just to say that the transition plan is based and builds on a lot of existing work. So there's nothing really new in that boxes that you saw. And our transition plan is consistent with a lot of other transition plan efforts that are going around in the world right now. For example, the UK TPT that was introduced just before lunch, and also Monica will be introducing the ICAPs, the Investor Climate Action Plans. And we are very consistent with them as well. Also, just to say that the scope of the net zero transition plan for GFANZ is around the action of aligning your portfolio towards the real economy decarbonization. So it's on the financing or what you might say the opportunity side. We don't cover the risk side, which we assume is covered through TCFD, but a lot of GFANZ associated companies actually bring all of them together in their TCFD report. So once you know the risk, you are talking about how you are going to be tackling the risk and seizing the opportunities. And so a lot of net zero transition plan is integrated into like an ISSB type or TCFD type reporting. And they actually inform each other. And also the more you do net zero transition planning and implementation, the better you are like dealing with your risk as well. And I think I think this is my last slide, but just to say that we are seeing a lot of transition plans starting to pop up across the world. And in Asia, it is still quite small right now for financial institutions, but the 3 mega banks in Japan have all published some sort of transition plan. And yesterday, UOB published their transition plan as well, and HSBC and others like Prudential that just spoke has also already issued their transition plan. So it is still very new, and we are not expecting perfection right now, but we hope that all the institutions that you represent also will tackle and develop and implement transition plans. Thank you. I'll pass on to Monica now.
Right. Thank you very much. So I think how GFANZ, how Yuki has explained it, and a lot of the work done, either in regulations or the outcomes when talking about transition plans, for financial institutions has been really in the portfolio companies and how to move the real economy. Now I'm going to change the view a little bit and look at as investors, because AIGCC, we ultimately work with asset owners and asset managers in this region. You can see here about 70 plus members across 11 markets in Asia and an AUM representing about 33 trillion. So we work with many large and different types of investors as well. But the view really changes to see how, as investors, what are you doing and what are your transition plans? So it's not just looking at the portfolio, but overall strategy, an overall view of investments and how investors should approach it as well. And this is how the Investor Climate Action Plan comes in as well. So Investor Action Climate Plan is really a pathway for investors and a transition plan for investors to move towards net zero. And we have put this together because you see here the net zero initiatives, and all of these 3 initiatives are under the GFANZ sector-specific initiatives as well. So we run two of them in Asia, the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative and the Paris-aligned asset owners as well. But you can see the 7 different network organization names on top, and they run each of the initiatives together in different forms as well. And we all came together and realized how big of a challenge it is for investors to work through their net zero plan and to actually make the commitments, to make the targets, and to plan and implement as well. So what we have done is we have come together and said, here are some pathways and here are some elements as investors where you need to look at. So you see in the like diamond shape where there are different areas where investors will need to look at. Firstly, their own investments, their portfolios, and that includes their targets as well of the portfolios and investments. Another big area of discussion has been around the corporate engagement and the importance of corporate engagement to decarbonize the real economy as well as more and more increasingly, there's importance of policy advocacy, and we are able to do that in the different markets. It's very much tied in with the corporate engagement work that's done as well as the disclosure. And there's an overall overarching governance element to this as well. And within AIGCC, like a lot of our work is designed to cover a lot of these different pillars of work to help the investors to identify, understand, and implement in the different markets within Asia, and the nuances and the understandings that's much needed as well. So I'll just go into a little bit about what the Investor Climate Action Plan is actually about and how it helps investors. What are we trying to achieve here? And it really helps investors to identify which and how to even approach net zero in a sense. So we talked to a lot of Asian-based investors where they come and said, we want to think and approach net zero, but the starting point and incorporating all the different frameworks, all the different areas that we need to cover, it is a challenge and a lot of work. So we are helping them out by identifying different areas, as I mentioned earlier, the 4 focus areas plus the governance area, of what in each element, what people should be looking at in and how that journey progresses on towards all the alignments and requirements of committing to net zero and achieving net zero. So we really help them make the commitment, look at different areas, make the plan, and also really embed it into the investment process. And a big area of that at the end you see is communicating with corporates and policy makers as well. And you can see here, in a way, the beauty of the Investor Climate Action Plan is that you can start, it incorporates investors who have not committed to net zero as well, and who are on the earlier journey of thinking about how to approach and progress their journey. And you can see here it's a tiered structure where you start with tier 4, where you're just really starting and beginning your journey. And I've just put out an example of target setting because that's an easier example to look at. But in each of the different focus areas, there'll be details around what to look at and which area and how it progresses on to the element and journey towards tier 1. And when you get to tier 1, you can kind of consider all the elements requested by Race to Zero, UNFCCC, or UN in the H-League, and also GFANZ requirements of net zero actually is embedded in this tiering as well. And one of the elements that we have done this past year is that we have updated this tier system to incorporate elements such as deforestation as one of a high emitting sector within the climate views, the discussion around just transition, as well as some other updates that are ongoing. So you can see this is a dynamic progress, and as the discussions evolve, so does this tiering system as well. And I just want to spend a little bit of time of how that might incorporate that in real life examples per se. And there wasn't enough time to go through how to transform and aggregate it on a company investor level of all the different tiers. So I've just brought here an example of some of the recent discussions that we had just earlier, last month, because it was early October. We had 2 different discussions. One was a steel roundtable with corporate steelmakers across Asian markets, as well as investors coming together in a closed door session, really just talking about how to address and accelerate the transformation that's needed in the steel industry. Another discussion that apparently came together quite nicely with the 2 discussions was a discussion around asset owners. So we had an asset owners roundtable where we discussed around how to transform the investments to a more climate-led investing, and not just focusing on the current investments, but more driving the investments that are needed to take place to actually reach the goal that we are looking at as well. You can also, I will try and explain it with the elements of the different focus areas of ICAPs, but you can also look at this from the view of the net zero methodologies per se, where one side, on the left-hand side, you can think of it as a decarbonization view of your portfolio, working with the companies, working with what regulations need to be made changes to achieve. And so it's a more decarbonization of the portfolio angle to it. On the right-hand side, where the discussion was under the asset owners, was more of alignment towards your portfolios towards net zero. So which investments need to be made in what way, and what are the challenges that investors face in doing that as well. So you can see those two elements where one side was the corporate engagement, policy advocacy, and disclosure is a big element to this discussion as well, because the better disclosure there is, the more data and the transition is the transparency that you have from that is very important as well. So the left-hand side of the some elements of the Steer Roundtable is actually publicly available, where you can read around what the discussions were around the technologies, what the discussions were, recommendations for policymakers are. And this is a very nascent stage. And you can think of how we probably progressed on the discussions, and probably a first time in a way of bringing a global sectorial view to a more regional pathway and what that looks like for Asia as well. On the right-hand side, I'll go into a little bit of detail, and I have just a snapshot of an article here because it was a closed-door event. And one of the discussions and examples on that was just this, it's a greenfield investment that was made in Sweden. And it was a 5 billion euros, where it was 1.5 equities, 3.5 debt. And the way that they were able to make that was, in a way, because it had to be green steel, traditionally where the steel makers are closer to a fossil fuel, this had to have renewable. So it had to start from scratch, in a way, of a greenfield long-term investment. And they had invested into a 5 billion euro as well. But from that, there's some discussions now going on in Canada as well. That is, still ongoing. But that just shows the kind of example and the investments needed, because it's not just looking at the portfolio and seeing, how do we achieve decarbonization, but also looking at the investments that are needed and how it's relevant to the discussions of the Steel Roundtable is. So you can think of Asia, where 70% of the global production is. And the global steel sector as a whole accounts for about 7% of emissions as well. So addressing it from a holistic view and making the investments, and also re-engineering, in a way, the strategy and the structure that investors are made is really what ICAPS is really about, and having that plan in place so that you can make these investments. And it's a structural approach to how everything comes in as well. I'll just stop here because I'm a little bit over time. But we do have a few questions. If we can have the questions out, please. Because this is meant to be a bit more of an interactive session. I know this setting is a little bit more challenging to do, but it is meant to be a bit more, so we have 5 questions, and some of them are quite simple. It's more asking about what your organizations are doing. And from there, we hope to address some of the questions as well.
Yeah.
The overview of, the type of institutions here. And then the second, from questions 2 to 5, are some of the real questions that we would like to ask. So I think we can move on to the second question as well. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so this one is, does your organization currently have a net zero transition plan? And we've actually been asking in different events that we're doing in different parts of the Asia right now. And so we're trying to get some data at different points of, different events that we do. And we've got 48% published. That's really impressive. Yeah, that's quite a lot. And then we are not ready yet, and working on one is about the same. And then there is no one that says we're not going to do anything. So that's very promising. Thank you. Let's move on. I think people can still vote, but if we can check what the other answers were. Okay, so how long do you expect until your regulator or supervisor requires a net zero transition plan? 2 to 5 years is quite a bit, and then 1 to 2 years, and then there's nothing on the others. Yeah, I think in Singapore especially, I think 2 to 5 years sounds like a good proxy, because we are now already seeing MAS come up with their consultation guidance on net zero transition planning for financial institutions, including one specifically for asset managers and investors. So yeah, 2 to 5 years. Okay, great. Thank you. And then we'll move on. You want to take this one? Okay. Is your organization actively looking to finance fossil fuel phase out? So the managed phase out of fossil fuel, I know that a lot of existing financial institutions' policies on coal would need to be adjusted to participate in this one, um, but yeah, it's nice to see that there's quite a high interest of yes, and then the second one is not yet considering. So just to let you know that in the Asia Pacific network of GFANZ, we are finalizing the report on financing the managed phase out of fossil of coal-fired power plants in APAC, and there is a section that is not so well developed in the consultation version that we put out in the summer. So in the final version, there is a section talking about how internal financial institutions' policies on coal could be adjusted to make a difference, make a differentiation between financing just fossil fuel and financing the managed phase out of fossil fuel. Okay, and the next one is, does your organization have fossil fuel and deforestation policies?
I think one of the key elements here is so there is more recognition that considering both fossil fuel and deforestation, recognizing as a high emitting sector officially within a lot of the net zero methodologies, as well as the standards recommended that are coming out. So I just wanted to check what the actual responses are in Singapore as well. And and the other element that we're doing within AIGCC is really working with investors to, especially around deforestation, is understanding the concept of deforestation, understanding how to do the risk exposure analysis of your own portfolios, and ultimately having an investment policy on no deforestation as well. So that's how it comes all together.
Do you want to comment on the response? It says quite a majority said they have both.
Actually, that is very encouraging. It might be a bias to the audience who are here as well, because the general understanding when I talk to a lot of the Asian-based investors is that they would have a fossil fuel policy, or they're looking to have a fossil fuel policy, but the work on deforestation is generally so we did an analysis of 200 asset owners and asset managers in this region, and the numbers were that for deforestation were about 15%, which is relatively much lower than here on both.
So we have an elite crowd today. Yeah. Okay. So I think we only have a few more minutes left, but we can actually accept questions questions here. So if there's any questions or any discussion points that you would like to raise, please raise your hand, and we'll spend just the last few minutes. Yep.
Thank you, Yuki. I'm Gilles. I look after the energy transition practice at Ernst & Young, and I work with mostly what you call real economy. For many of the corporate clients, transition finance is very daunting. Many of them are not Paris aligned, which doesn't mean they don't have the beginning of a net zero plan, but it's not necessarily aligned with Paris, aligned with SBTI, or aligned. So does GFANZ has a position on where do you draw the cursor? Where do you put the needle on you must be Paris aligned or you're not eligible for transition finance? Or is there, because it's Southeast Asia, because the country itself might not be Paris aligned? So what is GFAN's position on this order?
That's a really good question. So we've got this category called aligning towards net zero, and how far you determine aligning is your question, right? So at the moment, the global guidance says that you need to show aligning towards 1.5 degree, but the consultation on what is on refining the guidance around what are the four financing strategies, the four buckets that I showed you, is ongoing right now, and it's actually closing tomorrow on the 2nd of November. And the GFANZ APEC Japan chapter has actually put forward some feedback on exactly what kind of along the lines of what you are saying about how can we support especially emerging markets companies to transition, and that they might not necessarily be able to say that they are aligning towards 1.5 degree right now, but that there could be some like stepping stone strategies where they go from like Paris aligned to 1.5 degree in a gradual way. But that, I think that kind of discussion is still ongoing. So whatever comes out from GFANZ at the end of the year on the transition finance is not going to be the final, and that there will be a lot of stakeholders and GFANZ that will continue this discussion on how do we maintain integrity and credibility, and at the same time be as inclusive as possible, you know, not leaving industries and companies behind the transition journey. Thank you.
If I could just add here is that some of the work that is currently ongoing is the work around what does net zero mean for emerging markets, developing economies. I think up to date, a lot of the work has had a global view and a global lens to the developments. So at the moment, we're working through, and it's be a while before anything comes out, but we're working through to understand what that means on different development where the economies actually are. The other element is that when you're talking about portfolio and companies within the portfolios, I think just from an investor's point of view, when you're looking at targets and forming a strategy around it, it's really important to have the portfolio and decarbonization plans reflecting the real economy decarbonization rather than there are other ways to do it. So it's that view which comes in, and with that there will be other developments ongoing and methodologies that will be coming out as well.